A 15-year-old boy shows up at a repair shop in Tokyo, hoping to become a mechanic. Instead, the owner straps a baby to his back and tells him to babysit. No pay, no tools, no respect. If you told anyone in that shop that this kid would one day build an empire that would outsell Harley-Davidson on American soil and put Japan on the map in Formula One, they would have laughed you out of the building. But that boy was Soichiro Honda, and what he was about to go through would either break him or forge him into one of the greatest industrialists the world has ever seen. It started in 1906 in a dirt-poor village at the foot of Mount Fuji. Soichiro was born into hardship. His father was a blacksmith who patched up bicycles on the side. His mother wove cloth to help make ends meet, and 5 of his siblings didn't survive childhood. Life was brutal. But when Soichiro was 8 years old, something happened that would rewire his entire future. He heard a strange rumble in the distance, a sound he'd never heard before. He chased it down the street on foot, heart pounding, until he finally laid eyes on it. A Ford Model T, rolling along under its own power. No horse, no effort, just pure machinery, moving like magic. He would later say he couldn't understand how it moved, and without even thinking, he found himself sprinting after it as hard as he could. That single moment lit a fire in him that never went out. School, on the other hand, meant nothing to him. He hated it. He'd rather be turning wrenches with his father than sitting behind a desk, and his grades proved it. At one point, he was so desperate to hide his failing report card from his father that he forged the family stamp using a piece of rubber he'd carved himself. He got caught. His punishment was brutal. Kneeling for an entire day, no lunch. But even that couldn't kill his obsession with machines. At 15, he saw an ad for a Tokyo auto repair company called Art Shokai. He wrote them a letter. Against the odds, he got a reply. So he dropped out of school, said goodbye to his family, and left for the biggest city he'd ever seen,
Be safe, son.
chasing a dream with nothing but a letter in his pocket. And when he arrived, he wasn't handed a wrench, he was handed a baby. The shop owner needed a babysitter more than he needed an apprentice, and for months, that's all Soichiro did. No pay, no training, just humiliation. The only thing keeping him there was the shame of what it would mean to go home and admit defeat, but he stayed. And slowly, as the shop's workload grew too heavy for the owner to manage alone, Soichiro finally got his shot. He started small, sweeping floors, handing over tools, but his talent was impossible to ignore. Piece by piece, he climbed. Soon, he wasn't just fixing bicycles, he was working on Lincolns, Mercedes, Daimlers, machines most Japanese workers had never even touched. And then came the moment that would define the rest of his life: motorsports. In 1924, at just 17 years old, Soichiro stood trackside as an engineer on a race car built from scavenged parts, a second-hand airplane engine bolted onto an old American chassis. That car won. And from that day forward, racing wasn't just a job to Soichiro.
We made it!
It was a religion. By 21, he was running his own branch of the company in Hamamatsu. But here's the twist: nobody trusted him. Customers looked at this young, unproven mechanic and walked straight past his shop. He survived on scraps other repair shops didn't want.
Don't worry.
It should have ended there. Instead, within a few years, his one-man operation had exploded into a business employing 30 people. And Soichiro wasn't just running the shop, he was racing too, eventually setting a speed record that stood in Japan for 20 years. But speed has a price. In 1936, during a race, Soichiro crashed violently, fracturing his arm, dislocating his shoulder, tearing up his face. He nearly died. And yet, 4 months later, bandages barely off, he was back behind the wheel. It took his family threatening to walk away from him to finally make him quit racing for good. Around this same time, Soichiro made a bold move. He tried to convince his shareholders to pivot the company into manufacturing car parts. They refused. So he did what stubborn visionaries do. He walked away and started his own company from scratch, determined to build the perfect piston ring. This is where the story gets dark. For years, Soichiro poured everything into piston design and got nothing but failure after failure. He worked himself into the ground, literally. He lost so much weight from stress that friends said he looked like a different person. Humiliation followed. When Toyota agreed to test his pistons, he submitted 50. Only 3 passed. Most people would have quit right there. Instead, Soichiro went back to school, enrolling as a part-time student to master metallurgy, the science he'd been missing all along. And then, finally, in 1939, after years of failure, he cracked it. A piston that actually worked. Orders poured in. His company ballooned to nearly 2,000 employees almost overnight. Just as everything was finally coming together, World War II detonated his entire world. Japan's government seized control of his company for the war effort. Toyota bought up nearly half his business, and Soichiro was demoted in the very company he built. Workers were drafted away one by one, and then it got worse.
Take cover,
In 1944, his factory took a direct hit in an air raid.
Watch out, the structure is
in
unstable.
January 1945, an earthquake leveled another one of his plants. By the time Japan surrendered that August, Soichiro had lost almost everything he'd spent 2 decades building. He sold off the wreckage of his company and walked away, telling people he simply needed time to think about what came next. Japan after the war was a nightmare of scarcity. No food, no fuel, no supplies. Soichiro couldn't even find enough gasoline to drive to the market. But then he stumbled onto something small that would change everything. A surplus military generator engine, originally built to power radios during the war. He looked at it and had an idea nobody around him had thought of yet. At least, not in Japan. What if you strapped that little engine onto a bicycle? In 1946, working out of a beat-up old warehouse with just 12 men, he did exactly that. And it worked. People were desperate for cheap transportation, and these motorized bicycles sold out almost instantly. When he ran out of scavenged engines to use, he didn't slow down. He built his own from scratch.
Perfect.
In 1947, the first engine with the Honda name stamped on it rolled off the line. In 1948, the Honda Motor Company was officially born. But there was one massive problem: no money. So Soichiro did something almost unthinkable. He personally wrote letters to 18,000 bicycle shop owners across Japan, pitching them on his vision. Most ignored him, but 3,000 said yes. That was enough. With their backing, Honda shipped its first motorcycle, the Model D, bulky, heavy, and honestly, kind of a flop. Most people wouldn't have survived that failure. Soichiro just went back to the workshop. Years of relentless refinement later, Honda released the Super Cub, light, efficient, and an instant sensation. It won the Emperor's Prize, and with new business partner Takeo Fujisawa handling the money and marketing, Honda finally had the fuel to go global. In 1958, the Super Cub landed in America for just $295, a quarter of what competitors charged. Within years, Honda was outselling Triumph and even Harley-Davidson in their own backyard. And through all of it, Soichiro never stopped racing. Not personally, but strategically. Every time a rival broke a record, he'd study it, obsess over it, and push his team to beat it. Honda went from a humiliating international racing debut in 1954 to winning the world's most prestigious motorcycle race, the Isle of Man TT, by 1959. And again 2 years later. By the 1960s, Honda wasn't just competing, it was the biggest motorcycle manufacturer on Earth. But Soichiro had one dream left, the one that started with a boy chasing a car down a dirt road. Cars. Everyone told him it was insane. Japan already had Toyota and Nissan dominating the market, and even government officials tried to talk him out of it. He ignored every single one of them. Honda's first car in 1963 barely made a ripple. Its first sports car sold barely over 1,000 units. But Soichiro didn't stop. He took his cars straight to Formula One, and by 1965, Honda had already won a Grand Prix. Still, on the regular car market, they were getting crushed. Then came 1972, and the Honda Civic changed everything. Right as a global oil crisis sent shockwaves through the world economy, Honda unveiled fuel-saving technology that let drivers go further on less gas, plus emissions technology most competitors hadn't even considered yet. It was the right car at exactly the right moment. Then came the Accord, and Honda didn't just survive in America, it thrived.
Look at that shine, Steve.
By the end of the
Almost looks brand new.
1980s, the company that once couldn't afford gas for its founder's own car had become the third biggest automaker on the entire planet. Soichiro Honda stepped down in 1973 and passed away in 1991. Looking back on everything, the babysitting, the failed Pistons, the bombed factories, the crash that nearly killed him, he said he saw nothing but mistakes and blunders. But he was proud, because he said his failures never repeated themselves. He simply kept failing forward until an 8-year-old boy chasing a car down a dusty road became the man behind one of the greatest companies the world has ever seen.